Hello, I'm Somi Arian. I'm a tech philosopher, author, filmmaker, and the founder of Impeak. My guest on today's podcast is Lane Rettig, a former Ethereum Core Developer who now works as a developer for Spacemesh. I have previously had Tim Beiko on my podcast, who runs the core protocol meetings for Ethereum. So I wanted to have a perspective of someone who has now left Ethereum too. As someone who is heavily invested in the Web3 and NFT space and the Ethereum ecosystem, I'm always interested in hearing other viewpoints as well, to make sure that I'm not living in an echo chamber of my own making. I share these conversations with you so that you can listen and decide for yourself too. I listened to your podcast interview on what Bitcoin did with Peter McCormack, and I actually went back and listened to it a little bit more today to remind myself of some of the points that you mentioned. So what I wanted to talk to you about today mostly is about the merge and Ethereum, mainly because you had some concerns and there were some of the things that you mentioned that 7 months later, where you are, what's your thoughts, and I remember that Peter said that he was going to have you back after 6 months or so, and I was like, okay,
Yeah,
this is a good opportunity for me to to talk to you. Let's give everybody a little bit of a background. So you started out as being very much in the Ethereum camp and like very interested in what they were doing, and then you started to kind of fall away from that a little bit and went back to your Bitcoin roots, right? The reason why I'm interested in it, apart from the fact that I'm building a Web3 education platform, is that personally, actually, most of my digital assets are in the form of NFTs, and they are Ethereum-based
hmm
NFTs. And with what I'm building as well, we are going to be releasing our own NFT. So the destiny of Ethereum is very important to my business, So as they would say in the space, that I have a
sure.
lot of ETH bags, so I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, first of all, telling us a little bit about your background, but also then where are you now, 7 months later, since you last had that conversation with Peter McCormack?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for recapping the context. That's helpful for me as well, because 7 months is a long time in crypto months. Yeah, so I guess just starting with the absolute basics. So I'm a software developer. I've been writing code my whole life. I've done that in a number of different industries over the years. I guess I'm at a point in my life and my career now where, my CV is probably longer than one page. And so there's kind of a few sections. So I started my career in a traditional finance company, right? So we now have a term for this, TradFi, as opposed to DeFi. So I was at a quantitative hedge fund for about 6 years. Um, After that, I went back to school. So I was studying business and international studies in grad school. I changed gears completely and I became an entrepreneur and had a healthcare technology startup for a while. So again, radically different industry, moving from traditional finance to healthcare. Did that for about 3 or 4 years. And it was actually, so now we're getting to 2016 into 2017. So I was taking a little bit of time off after I stopped working on the healthcare startup and I accidentally discovered crypto and blockchain. I think that they had been in the back of my mind. I'd been aware of both Bitcoin and Ethereum, but of course, because I'd been in this heads down focused founder mode for years, I didn't really have the mental space to really sit down and understand them. So that finally happened in late 2016, early 2017. The very first thing I did was start going to Bitcoin meetups and kind of just joined the Bitcoin community to the extent that such a thing exists. And then, yes, I very rapidly, as you mentioned, kind of went down the Ethereum rabbit hole. I joined the Ethereum Foundation in late 2017. I worked there as a core developer for about 2 years, both on the tech side as well as on kind of the social and governance side. You would have heard me speak about both of those, I guess, but the kind of governance stuff with Peter on his podcast. And then in 2019, I changed gears again and I joined a fledgling project called Spacemesh. And so I've been doing that for the past 3 years. So I am a Bitcoiner first and foremost. I still consider myself an Ethereum and I'm active in that ecosystem. I run Ethereum 2 validators. I follow the project closely. I still attend a lot of Ethereum events, etc. But my day job today is R&D for a project that hasn't launched yet. We're launching Spacemesh soon. So yeah, sorry, that's just framing. And then I think you were asking how my thoughts about Ethereum have evolved over the past few months.
That's right. But maybe let's first tell people where you were last time when I heard you, or maybe I can try and say it and you can tell me whether I understood it correctly. And that was that you essentially decided that you were not very happy with Ethereum going towards the proof of stake consensus mechanism, and you thought that this could be a problem for Ethereum down the line. Do you still believe that, considering how close we are to the merge? And let's recap some of your concerns that you had about that.
Yeah, great question. So I think in a nutshell, so there's sort of two ways to look at this. So the first part is why I left Ethereum in 2019. I'm sorry. Yeah, 2019. Yeah. And that I would say that the roadmap, including kind of the proof of stake transition, was part of that, but it was actually a small part of it. I think the much larger frustrations I had with the project at that time involved the governance at that time, right? So this was years before that transition was going to happen, which again, like some of those frustrations still exist. They're not entirely unrelated to proof of stake. Although again, I think that there's a little bit of overlap, but they're kind of two distinct sets of concerns. Some of those concerns still exist. Some of them I think may have changed a bit in that time. It's obviously been 3 years. And then apart from that, the proof of stake transition, here's the way I would put it. I would say I have a number of objections to proof of stake in the abstract, right? And this is what I went into depth with Peter about on the interview I did with him a few months ago on this topic. I think it was called Why Proof of Stake is Flawed, something like that. Having said that, in the specific case of the Ethereum upgrade, so this is unique and distinct from other proof of stake implementations in a few ways. I'll just highlight one now, and then we can dig into it or look at the other aspects. The most obvious aspect is that when a network launches in the beginning with proof of stake, right? In other words, it's the only consensus mechanism the project has had, and this is the case with projects like Cosmos and Near and Solana and many other projects that launch with proof of stake, right? They have this issue of initial token distribution. In other words, proof of stake cannot be used to do token distribution in any sort of credibly neutral or quote unquote. I try to avoid the word fair, but most people would use the word fair kind of way. We use the term credibly neutral, and that's sort of a game theoretic term. In other words, with a proof of stake launch, what you end up having is you end up with a very small number of people who are insiders, investors, et cetera, who hold those tokens on day one, run the validators, can maintain their stake, et cetera, right? Proof of work, by contrast, is credibly neutral in the sense that it's permissionless, right? So anyone anywhere can spin up a node. They don't need to have tokens ahead of time. They don't need to have been part of the pre-mine or an early investor. And so Ethereum now has 7 years of proof of work history. And so over those 7 years, those coins have been generated and distributed to a very large set of actors. And this is unique, right? This is very different. No network has done this transition before. And so actually, Ethereum is in a better place than a network that just launched with proof of stake.
Okay, that's super interesting. That's really interesting because you're the way that you're putting it. So Ethereum has got the most chance of any other chain to succeed in this space, right?
Yeah, let me be very clear. I think the merge will happen soon. I think it will succeed. I think Ethereum will be fine. So I think your NFTs will be okay, and hopefully mine will too.
Yeah.
I just think there are some nuances with respect to things like governance and fairness and this credible neutrality topic. And those are the kinds of things Peter and I were talking about. So none of this means Ethereum is going to die, right? It just means that I think it's good to be aware of these nuances.
So I call myself a tech philosopher. I look at the philosophy of technology. So let's get into on a philosophical level, what are some of the issues that you see with the with the proof of stake mechanism, and then let's put that aside and then look at from a technical point of view, why is this this merge happening and why is Ethereum making this change? Because I remember when you spoke with Peter, you said very clearly that one of the reasons why proof of work would struggle with the kind of volume that is required of a chain to be able to maintain all of the different things that we want to be able to do with DeFi and NFTs and DAOs, like Bitcoin just can't do that, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that those things just can't be built on Bitcoin. There's that issue, and then there's the fact that there's this community in Ethereum in a way, especially in the NFT space. There's a very, very strong sense of community in a way that is not in Bitcoin, and I sold all of my Bitcoin to buy ETH so that I could buy these NFTs because I wanted to get into various NFT communities. One of my NFTs, my proof pass, I bought it for $140,000. So there's a reason why I did that, because I wanted to be part of that community, and I wanted access. I wanted that. The things that I'm learning there are so helpful to me. I don't believe we have that in Bitcoin, like it's not quite the same way. So there's that adoption side of things to think about as well. So let's take a step back. So start with, on a philosophical level, what's your problem with the governance? Let's understand that properly. And then look at on a technical, so then we can look at like what's the trade-off in terms of the kind of ideal governance and the ideal technical.
All right, this is ambitious roadmap. Let's dig in. I love that you used the term. What was the term? Technical philosopher? Did I get that right?
Tech philosopher
of technology.
Yeah,
That's beautiful. I might borrow that. Yeah, I mean, because I think that the governance of anything as complex as Bitcoin or Ethereum is so complicated and so nuanced that you can't hope to understand it if you're not comfortable approaching it philosophically. And I think that's actually tied to some of my issues with governance. So let me try to explain those briefly. If I had to describe the governance of Ethereum historically in a single word, basically the word I would use is naive, right? It was historically governed by a very small number of people, like on the order of 10 to 20 people, who historically knew each other. I mean, which makes sense. I guess most projects start this way. These are people who were in the room together in the early days, circa 2014, 2015, 2016. The project also wasn't as complicated back then. And the decision was made, or maybe no decision was made, right, that no sort of formal structured governance system would be put in place, right? It would just be kind of ad hoc. And this is tempting and attractive and naive. And you see this very often with tech founders and tech teams, probably in other spaces as well, right? And I think that it stems from a frustration with existing governance structures, whether they be corporate governance structures or kind of nation state type governance systems. There's obviously a libertarian ethos that's very common in the crypto space, and a great deal of frustration with existing world governments and governance. So specific governments as well as just governance more generally. And so there's this naive, you're going to keep hearing me use this word naive, this naive desire to build something that is apart from or outside of or above governance, right? And it's utopian in a sense. It's like, oh, if you put a bunch of people in a room together, it's actually almost anarchistic in a way. Anarchist rather, in a way. You don't have any formalized governance, and you kind of let people act in a high trust fashion and be good to one another and figure it out. But the problem with this is that there's always bad actors who exploit these situations. It doesn't scale. And in particular, what I saw in Ethereum very acutely was this phenomenon called the tyranny of structurelessness, TOS. Right? So tyranny of structurelessness is a concept that I wasn't familiar with when I first joined the Ethereum ecosystem. In fact, it was articulated in the 70s by a feminist activist named Joe Friedman. I hope I got that name right. And it's a short essay, and I recommend all your audience read it, right? Tyranny of Structurelessness. If you Google it, it'll be the first hit. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's something that emerged again from a feminism movement in the 70s. And it speaks very powerfully to the human condition and to the ways in which when you put people in a room together, metaphorically or physically, without structures, without elected leaders, without any kind of governance system, inevitably a group of elites emerges and begins to capture the governance socially, in the sense that some small number of people kind of rise to the top and gain more influence. And anyway, long story short, this is kind of what I witnessed in Ethereum, and it was very frustrating because Ethereum aspires to be this global network that will be around for a long time, and that NFTs and many other types of applications can be built on and billions of humans can use. And I feel very strongly that that cannot be done in a fashion where this tyranny of structurelessness phenomenon is so acute. So I'll pause there for a second because that's kind of a lot, but that was the core of my frustrations at that time.
Okay, very interesting. You could say that pretty much every leader in history, whatever they've tried to do, has been idealistic. And I think there is a very thin line between idealistic and naivety. I think, anytime you try to solve a problem, in many ways, it is naive, because you need a degree of naivete to have the courage to try and change the status quo. I have so many examples of my own naivete in life when I think about it. I remember, for example, when I was growing up in Iran. I was reading books by people like Professor Brian Greene. I was obsessed with everything to do with space and time and all that stuff. And I remember at one point I wrote him a letter, and I sent it to I Googled and found an address for the university that he was in, and I wrote him a letter. And you could say that was very naive, right? Like he would probably never either receive it, not look at it. In many ways it was completely naive, right? But actually now I have my own podcast, and he's actually on the list of people that we are inviting, to the podcast. So I will get to talk to him, many years later. So the point what I'm trying to make here is that every form of improvement in human history often starts with a form of naivete. It starts with some kind of, simplification of a problem. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. Like you could say that with Bitcoin even. That's why in the beginning nobody took it seriously, and many people were. Look, somebody paid 10,000 bitcoins for for a pizza, right? Yeah, and yeah, I think that you definitely, every time you're designing a new system, you need that. There needs to be some kind of naivete. That part of it, I can understand. The other thing is that I don't think we will ever be, and I don't think we definitely aren't yet in a place where the structure of society can be completely flat. I consider myself as a bit of an anarchist. I don't know if you know Michael Malice. I like people like Michael Malice.
I do.
I really like him. Like I consider myself an anarchist. I'm a Nietzschean. Like it's I like that kind of the idea of a flat society, but at the same time I'm a leader at heart. So I think I've always been the kind of person that would like take initiative and bring people together and do things. So in a society you're always going to have these types of different characteristics, and there will be people that will rise to the top, and they will be there to bring people together. So I don't necessarily think that with things like with Ethereum or with decentralization, it's not about completely getting rid of leadership. It's about evolving leadership in a way that it becomes more of a dialogue, that that it's an improvement over the kind of current form of democracy that we have. So what's your reaction to that? What are your thoughts on your initial just reaction to what I just said? Do you still think that the fact that there's some form of governance in Ethereum, that's still a problem?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for sharing that story. That's a really lovely, inspirational story. So I encourage everyone to do silly, ambitious, naive things once in a while, because sometimes they pay off. So again, it's a great story. I broadly agree with what you're saying, right? I think you have a very valid point that the most exciting projects and initiatives have a degree of naivete in them, in the sense that you could argue it's naive or hubristic to think that one could kind of challenge the status quo in any big way, and that is kind of where change comes from, right? There's some quote, something about how reasonable people play by the rules, unreasonable people play by their own rules. Therefore, all meaningful social progress is caused, is initiated by unreasonable people. So I think that that's accurate. I think the lens that I'm kind of approaching this from is an institutional lens, right? So I find this lens to be particularly useful. It's something I was first introduced to in business school, and have since, learned more about through some folks who are much smarter than I am, through governance communities like MetaGov. There's a really fantastic community, metagov.org, that does like weekly seminars and has some really brilliant thinkers in it. So another resource I recommend people check out. And Radical Exchange is another one. You might have heard of Glenn Weil and Radical Markets book and Radical Exchange. So these are some of the folks that I've been kind of like picking up IQ points from over the past few years. And so they talk a lot about this institutional lens as well, right? I think, as these projects like Bitcoin and like Ethereum continue to scale and the market caps continue to grow and the user base grows, et cetera, they become more established institutions, then I think it becomes more and more important that we think very carefully about how they're governed and who has a role in governance and how accessible that governance is to people around the world. Now, Bitcoin, of course, is a very different case because Bitcoin governance is complex and kind of intentionally opaque. And many people will say Bitcoin doesn't really have governance. It's a little bit more anarchist in that way. So I guess Michael would like it. Ethereum is a little bit more structured. And I think one of the ways in which it has improved is as we approach this Ethereum 2 merge, the number of stakeholders has grown. There's more software projects that are very active in the ETH2 roadmap than there were in the olden days, when I was involved in the project. So there are more entry points. But I would want to be part of a society, and I want to build a society that allows upward mobility, right? So just to give you one very concrete example. And I think that in a very chaotic, anarchistic kind of ecosystem that is really dominated by something like tyranny of structurelessness, that may be close to unachievable. And those are my concerns, I think, is ensuring kind of accessibility and access to as many humans as possible.
But do you think that Bitcoin is the solution then, or do you think that neither of them are the solution?
Solution to what? Let's state our problem very clearly.
To allowing this the type of society that you are suggesting.
I think they're part of the solution, right? And I think so because they offer a very different institutional model. I think the best example of this is the DAO, right? And I'm speaking now about DAOs in a more abstract sense. So not necessarily about any particular DAO. I mean, I think we could refer to Bitcoin and Ethereum themselves as DAOs, and Bitcoin is the first DAO. But specifically because other types of institutions are more complex and require a lot more activation energy. So companies, are probably the easiest, right? And in some places, like the United States, it's not that hard to set up a company. Obviously, international institutions are significantly more complicated to establish. But they're not internet native. Even the simplest LLC, which is kind of the most lightweight company you can have in the United States and in many places, right? Even that is not internet native, and it's still kind of needs to be tied to a particular jurisdiction, a particular body of law, a particular currency. There's a lot of baggage associated with it. Whereas a DAO is an internet native institution. It's a thing that any number of people anywhere in the world can spin up in a matter of minutes using. Again, Bitcoin, it's a little bit hard to kind of do some of this stuff. It's theoretically possible. It's practically very difficult. But certainly tools on Ethereum and many other smart contract platforms make this very easy. And so in this respect, yes, I think that they allow a new type of institution that is accessible to orders of magnitude more people who may be in parts of the world where they, for whatever reason, are not likely to become an employee of a US-based, Delaware C corporation or something, but they're much more likely to join a DAO.
Yeah. So the way that I see it, I think that we need both to me, it makes sense that you need both. I don't know why the crypto community can't come to an agreement with, on this issue. I'm definitely buying some more Bitcoin once, I'm waiting for the dip, to go a little bit
Oh, we
lower.
haven't. So this recent dip, we have a bigger dip coming. Is that your
Yeah, I
forecast?
think so. Yeah, I think this is just, we are having a relief rally, so I definitely think that there's going to be a dip. So I'm waiting for that dip. The way I see it, I think, there's merits to both, and I think they kind of keep each other, what do you call it in English? You say at check, or they in check?
Keep each other in check, or you could just say keep each other honest. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I like the fact that we have both. And I know that the two communities don't quite get along sometimes, which is kind of ironic because for most investors, or retail investors especially, you ask them, what are you buying? They say Bitcoin and Ethereum, or Bitcoin and ETH, right? Right. So most people actually, invest in both. But the hardcore people from both communities don't seem to get along. Is there something that can be done to the way I see it is like the crypto community is so small. We don't have the luxury of half of us not being there. You see what I mean? Like,
Right.
we actually need each other, and I wish people would see that. Like some of the podcast guests that I'm going to be having on my podcast. Sometimes when I tell them, that these are the conversations, and some of the Bitcoin maxis, for example, Jimmy Song, I'll just say it, and I'm going to talk to him about it when he comes on the podcast. He said that I will come on the podcast, but I want to talk about Bitcoin. I don't want to talk about crypto and Web3. And I said, okay, like, just come on and we will figure it out. But the first question I'm going to ask him when he comes, I'm going to ask him actually, why do you not want to talk about, these other things? And I've had other Bitcoin strong advocates. I'm trying not to use the word maximalist because I know that Peter doesn't like that. But strong advocates of Bitcoin, many of them. Sometimes it really baffles me that they say they don't see the other applications of blockchain technology as being even valid or interesting. Like, for example, I had Stefan Livera on my podcast, and he said very clearly, he said that I don't think blockchain technology is in itself interesting. Bitcoin is the innovation. And I just can't see how that that comes about, like it's like a contradiction in terms in many ways, because actually, personally, I got into blockchain technology not through Bitcoin. For many people, they got into blockchain because they discovered Bitcoin and the number go up technology. For me, that was not what got me into it. I was doing a lot of research on AI, through all this philosophy of technology stuff that I study. And as I was reading a lot about AI, in one of the books I was reading, I come across this term called blockchain, and I'm like, what is blockchain? So then I started reading about blockchain technology. And actually, when I fully understood blockchain, at that point, I still didn't know anything about Bitcoin per se. I read books about the blockchain technology, and the first thing that came to my mind was that, oh, this is going to disrupt Amazon. This is going to disrupt Google. This is why I'm interested in it, because it's going to make it possible to, not have that intermediary. So, and governments, of course, and banks, all that stuff. Clearly, blockchain technology in itself is fascinating. It's so interesting. There's so many things that can be done with it. But as you know, and I know, and many people who are listening to this will have hopefully watched my video about the blockchain trilemma. I have one on YouTube. That the biggest problem that we have with blockchain technology is the scalability, and that's the problem that Ethereum is trying to solve in a way that I don't think Bitcoin has even tried to, the Bitcoin community, I don't think they've even tried to solve that problem, because Ethereum is, there's something that clicks for you when you get into things like NFTs, for example. Then you see the need for scalability, right?
Sure.
And I don't think Bitcoin community understands that because they're not into those things. They're not in those communities. They're not in those discourse. They don't see the need. They don't understand fully why we are trying to do this. So as somebody who's been in both camps, what are your thoughts on this issue of the scalability and the fact that the Bitcoin community doesn't seem to really see this?
Let me speak really, really briefly to the first part of your question, which is about the two camps not seeing eye to eye. I think this actually has very little to do with blockchain or even technology. I think this is just human nature. I think the human brain is really, really good at filtering things. I think it's the only way we get anything done in our lives. We have billions and billions of bits of information kind of flying at us through our five senses, every second. And the only way that we are able to have conversations or focus on a task or something really is the brain is just really good at filtering things out. And so it has many heuristics, right? And I think that one of them is kind of ignoring nuance and picking a narrative in a camp, right, and kind of sticking to it. And you see this in so many aspects of life. You see this in the debate about how to respond to the Russia-Ukraine situation. Here in the United States, as I'm sure you're aware, this abortion topic has become very big. We have this culture war. We have these camps. These are all just simplification kind of tactics. And I think that Bitcoin, Ethereum it's just a fundamental divide. It's like Republicans and Democrats, or take your pick, so it's going to be around for a while. And it's, maybe there's a healthy tension there. And I almost feel that each side wouldn't exist if the other side didn't exist. Some things can only exist in this kind of dialectic. But actually, this leads directly into your question about the scaling thing. Really, what it boils down to is a philosophical difference, right? Bitcoiners are extraordinarily cautious and conservative with respect to protocol changes. And I think that's good, right? Because I think that there should exist a blockchain that is extremely conservative and maximizes security at the cost of usability and scalability. And of course, you refer to the trilemma, right? So everything is a trade-off. There's a reason that Bitcoin is the store of value, and I still to this day feel more comfortable storing value in Bitcoin than I do in Ethereum. Although I do think Ethereum is moving in the direction of being a good store of value as well. And Ethereum optimizes philosophically and technologically for other things, right? It early on really maximized innovation, right? So the trade-off here would be conservatism on the one hand, or security, I guess, on the one hand, versus innovation. But as it's matured, it's becoming more and more conservative, and the protocol, it hasn't ossified yet to the extent that Bitcoin has. In other words, there's still some pretty big things that are changing, but it's moving in that direction. And Vitalik has said his goal is that once these 3 or 4 next milestones are reached, that the Ethereum protocol will stop evolving, and kind of all the additional innovation will be pushed out to layer 2, layer 3, to higher layers. I think with respect to scaling specifically, I actually would push back a little bit. And I think that the Ethereum roadmap has evolved. I think that there's still a common misperception about this. Early on, the vision was that the Ethereum roadmap would have this sort of Serenity phase that we're moving into. It goes by a few names. It used to be called Serenity, Ethereum 2. Now it's the merge, right? So we're not supposed to use the Ethereum 2 phrase anymore. Originally, it included not only proof of stake, but also sharding. And the idea was that there would be dozens or perhaps hundreds of shards, and this would increase the capacity. That's not happening anytime soon, right? And so actually, this next phase is not really about scaling. It's really about other things, primarily the proof of stake transition. And the main reason for this is that scaling has been pushed out to layer 2 via solutions like rollups. And interestingly, this is also possible on Ethereum, via things like Lightning.
Oh, you meant that it's also possible on Bitcoin via things like...
I'm sorry, yeah. So basically doing scaling at layer 2, exactly.
From somebody who is more of an insider to the technical side of what's happening there, I'm sure you know this better than me, but from an outsider perspective, when I look at it, I don't see the kind of enthusiasm that I see in Ethereum community. Like, for example, I interviewed Carl Flourish from Optimism. And like when I look at there the people from Polygon, I haven't interviewed them yet, but when I look at the interviews that they're doing out there, it just seems like Arbitrum, Polygon, there's like so many things So
Right.
many people are working, so many more people are working on layer 2 solutions for Ethereum than in Bitcoin. And they
Right.
seem to be moving faster. They seem to be, younger, more enthusiastic, like really innovative. Whereas when I look at something like Bitcoin and Lightning, I don't yet know. It's like maybe it's ignorant of me, but I don't know who is running, who is like spearheading Lightning. It's not clear. I don't know how to explain. It's kind of like with the Ethereum community, I feel a sense of connection. Whether it's through, you think about how many things has come out of the Ethereum community. There's been DAOs, there's been DeFi, there's been, NFTs. Now there's this soulbound tokens. Like they're constantly evolving, constantly new solutions. And these solutions are things at the metaverse, like all of these things that are, that seem like they're a lot more relevant to our time. And I believe that increasingly we are going to be living in the metaverse. Look at what happened with the pandemic, us doing this thing on Zoom. I can see Bitcoin as like this store of value that is like really nice backup. It's like I think of it as like my backup plan. It's like my store of value. But in terms of relevance to the kind of life that we are going to be living, I don't see that, happening quite the same way in the Bitcoin community. Whereas with Ethereum, I can see that. And the reason why I'm a lot more bullish on Ethereum than, say, for example, Solana, Avalanche, and all the other chains is exactly what you said, that there's this unique position that Ethereum is in, which makes me think I feel a lot more confident keeping my money in ETH than in, say, some of the other chains, Solana, etc. So with all of these things said, do you still feel strongly about your opposing views on Ethereum, or do you feel like, do you see the value in it, and do you think that it's a good thing to have it, and where we're going with it?
Yeah, great question. I want to just agree with what you were saying about the relevance of Ethereum and the excitement, and you really only need to go to really one Ethereum meetup and one Bitcoin meetup or conference or something to get a sense of what you're talking about. You see immediately the energy in the room. I was at one of these large ETH global hackathons here a few weeks ago, and it was remarkable. I mean, this is into a bear market. People came from all over the world, very young people, very diverse. I mean, extraordinarily diverse. I was meeting teams from dozens of countries, people who looked different and sounded different and lots of different genders and everything. You don't get that in Bitcoin meetups, and also many first timers as well. So just a lot of people kind of like still arriving new in this ecosystem and excited about it. I think it's accurate. And if you look at criticism from folks like Nick Carter, who have been in the space a few years, who are very reasonable people who are very introspective and think about this stuff a lot, he's criticized Bitcoin along these lines as well. That it's kind of failing to excite, new generations of hackers, so to speak. And over the long term, this is going to be difficult for Bitcoin. And I think it's something that a lot of our Bitcoin maximalist friends have not really come to terms with. Again, I'm just repeating what folks like Nick have said, and this has been discussed on Peter's podcast as well. I don't know what this means for Bitcoin. I again, going back to what I said earlier, I think it's okay that Bitcoin be conservative and not change a whole lot. But over the really long term, if Ethereum and other projects continue to just attract the vast majority, the lion's share of young, excited, talented people, venture capital, et cetera, one can't help but wonder if ultimately that sort of brain drain phenomenon is going to begin to eat value from Bitcoin. I think it probably already has. I mean, I think I think that's fairly evident. So circling back to your question, I think both can be true, right? So I think that my kind of criticism of Ethereum stands, right? I think that my criticism of proof of stake, I think there's some very valid kind of points there, and there's some risks. And again, if we have a couple extra minutes, we can talk about some of them, but they were also covered pretty thoroughly on the conversation with Peter, and I've also blogged about this. I think Ethereum could do more to make its governance kind of more explicit and more inclusive. And in particular, we touched a little bit upon this earlier, like making room for people like philosophers, right? So one of my big complaints about Ethereum's governance was that it's this de facto technocracy, where you have this very small unelected group of, again, on the order of 10, and maybe today it's on the order of 100, effectively Western male coders, right? I mean, I'm a Western man. I have no issue with that per se, but again, to the extent that Ethereum kind of purports to be a network for the entire world, I think it's important that there are more voices in its governance, and in particular, people who are not just hackers and coders, but also philosophers, people in experience in political philosophy, conflict resolution, history. Take your pick, right? There's many perspectives that I think matter here. It's not just an open source project anymore. It is, in a sense, I mean, it's a DAO for sure, and it is a kind of, I don't know what the right word for this is. It's sort of a network state, to borrow Balaji's terminology, right? So it's kind of a community that people have an affiliation to, and it's part of their identity. There's this very strong Ethereum identity, and you see this at events and things. So again, I think to the extent that Ethereum wants to continue to grow that and remain relevant and be a big tent, I just think it's very, very important that steps be taken to make room for many voices in governance, right? So that's one half of my brain. The other half of my brain, as I said, both can be true, is that Ethereum remains a very exciting project. I agree with you. I think it's the most exciting project out there. I'm very bullish on the future of Ethereum, both technologically and socially at this moment. And I have seen some progress along the lines addressing some of my criticism about the governance issues. So yeah, I like it a lot, and I wish it. This is how love works, right? You can love a person or a thing or an institution, and because you love it so deeply, you're frustrated that it's not better than it is.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree with you. Look, it's a little bit like that saying. What was it that Churchill, I think, said that all systems are terrible. Democracy is like something like that. I've probably butchered it, but you know what I mean. Like, I think everybody has heard that. You can correct me if you know the exact quote, but basically that democracy, yes, it's not great, but it's the best that we have, right? So in a similar way, I hear your concerns about governance. I studied political philosophy. That's why I'm interested in all of these stuff, and I hear everything that you're saying, but at the very least, maybe at the governance level, that perspective difference is lacking. But when you come into the level of NFTs and culture, then there is a lot more room for for exploring and like having a lot more diversity. Whereas in Bitcoin, you don't even have that, because it's like there's this immaculate start, and then nobody knows, like from there on, it's just like on a cultural level. When you think of, when you go to a Bitcoin conference, I didn't go to Bitcoin Miami, but a lot of my friends went, and they were the things that the vibes that they were describing to me was like basically like a bit of a gentleman's club, in many
Yes.
ways. Whereas you would never see that in Ethereum, and it's not acceptable, that type of thing. Anyway, so we're coming to the end of this conversation. I really appreciate your input. There's and I will put in the show notes, I will put a link to your interview with Peter, because we haven't gone into a lot of the technical stuff here today, because that will open a whole new conversation. I wanted to have a conversation with you that would be complementary to what Peter had, so that people can then listen to both. I have a lot of respect for Peter, but I also disagree with him on a lot of counts. I'm actually stealing a lot of his guests. So, so that I can have a slightly different conversation with them. I had Travis Kling on, and we had such a great conversation about the fact that we potentially live in the simulation, and
That's a fun one. Yeah, that's a fun topic. And I'm excited to hear that you're interviewing some of the same folks, but in a very different context. I think this conversation has been very complimentary to Peter's.
Yeah, definitely. And you should definitely listen to my conversation with Travis, because especially the second part of it, we went into rabbit hole of, do we live in a simulation? And we both think that we live in a simulation. So
Well,
still,
I mean, yeah, some very, very smart people say it's at least, I think, 50-50, right? It's more likely than not. And there's the whole Nick Bostrom argument about it. So this is yeah. And if you have an AI background, you will have thought about this a lot there.
yeah,
So
well,
it's a
actually,
fascinating
I
topic.
applied to do a PhD with Nick Bostrom, but he wasn't taking on new students. so, so yeah, it's
That was very naive of you.
it was very naive of me, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I think I have covered everything. So all in all, you think that the merge is going to be okay? My bags are going to be okay? That everything is going to be fine? You think that the merge is going to happen this year? And from a technical point of view, that you think is going to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have no inside information whatsoever. Not that there is any inside information per se. I mean, this is all, happening in the open. It's an open source project. In fact, I was actually just catching up a little bit today, reading the status of some of the quote unquote shadow merges. So there have actually been quite a few of them. A number of the test nets have been merged, and there's one more coming up next month. I think in about 2 weeks or something. The Gurley testnet is going to be rolled over to proof of stake as well, and attached to one of the existing proof of stake beacon chain testnets, which I think is called Prodder. So I think what people need to know is that this is not. I mean, it is a technically complicated project, but it's not a one and done, right? It's something that has been done again and again and again, and of course, each time one of these like testnet merges is carried out, bugs are discovered. And the most recent one, there were some kind of small issues that happened. I was studying the docs today because I'm excited about it, and I want to participate in this final testnet merge as a way of preparing for the mainnet one. But yeah, I mean, all the indicators I've seen, the light is green, and we're coming up. We're now like weeks, months, if not weeks away from this happening. And of course, like unknown unknowns can still happen, but the roadmap is clear, and progress is being made. And this is exciting because it was a standing joke for many years among not only like Bitcoiners but Ethereum folks as well. Like the Ethereum roadmap will never happen. That Vitalik tweeted out there's a really funny slide from a presentation he did like 2014 or maybe early 2015 that showed the Ethereum roadmap, and it had these major milestones coming 2 or 3 months apart. I think this is part of like a January 1st update that he had tweeted. And this merge, which is to say this proof of stake transition, was supposed to happen like 8 months after this presentation in 2015 or something. And he kind of mentioned in his retrospective how he was so naive about how complex some of this stuff is technically. But yeah, I mean, here we are in 2022. It is happening. There's a big gathering of the Ethereum community, DevCon, that's happening in October in Bogota, and I think the merge is supposed to, fingers crossed, right? It's supposed to happen kind of just before that, which was the case in 2017. There was a big network hard fork that happened just before the DevCon event in the autumn of that year, and everyone was kind of celebrating. So the strong hope is that we can all come together and celebrate this in October. And so yeah, any of your listeners who are excited to be a part of that, I'd urge them to watch the merge closely. There'll be a lot of Zoom calls they can join with champagne and stuff, and maybe an in-person celebration shortly after. And just to reiterate, this is the largest network upgrade that's ever happened to a blockchain. So it's a very significant milestone. You can hear in my voice, like, again, despite all of my criticisms and my reservations about proof of stake, it's a significant milestone. I'm very excited about it. I think it means a lot of good things for the Ethereum community.
Awesome. Yeah, no, definitely. I'm excited about it. And I hope that by saying all these things, Peter is not gonna he's probably not gonna have you back on his podcast because you said all these good things about being excited about it.
He knows I'm a shit corner. He's the first to call me that.
It's exciting. Look, it's always like that with technology. You always have to put yourself out there. You have to experiment. A lot of people are not going to like it. It's inertia, it's like we just get used to something, like you don't like Bitcoin, and then once you start using Bitcoin, then you're like, oh, okay, now I don't like anything else. And then once you start using that, you don't like the next thing, right? So it's always like that. This is the story of technology. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me. I actually interviewed Tim Beiko some time ago. I'm going to have him back on closer to the merge or just after. Fingers crossed. Let's hope that it all goes well.
I'm glad you were able to speak to Tim. He's a great guy. He's doing really important work. He's going to be a very, very busy guy. He's always a busy guy. He's going to be an extra busy guy these next few months, but he'll be able to, of course, share way more than I can about the status of that project. But yeah, thank you for having me, Somi. This has been a lot of fun. I'm very, very excited about your project and about the work you're doing here to help folks kind of see all of this Web3 crypto mumbo jumbo from a different perspective. So thank you so much for that.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Lane Rettig. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it on Apple, Spotify, or any other one of your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to give it a 5-star rating and write a review. The full interviews are also available on my YouTube channel, The Somi Arian Show.